Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are tuning in from. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, Managing Water in Soils. My name is Clover Balluz, the IA's Professional Development Director, and I have just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. All phones will be muted during the session, and this session will be recorded. This webinar is worth half of a CEU and will automatically be added to your account as long as you attend the entire duration of the webinar. We will send out a PDF copy of the PowerPoint slides within a week following this broadcast. We will also have a question and answer session at the end of this webinar. If you do have any questions, please type them into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Your presenter will address them at the end of the session. Our speaker today is Don Spier. As Vice President at Precision Laboratories, Don is responsible for leading the company's water management initiative in agriculture. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Ornamental Horticulture from the University of Illinois and has served in the roles of Golf Course Superintendent, Distributor Sales Representative, and Regional Sales Manager for various organizations. With a passion for both turf and agricultural industries, Don is affiliated with professional organizations including the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, the Sports Turf Managers Association, and the Irrigation Association. Now over to Don.
Thank you, Clover. And before we get started, I'd like to thank the Irrigation Association for the opportunity to discuss managing water in soils with your members and guests on the webinar today. So let's talk a little bit about what we'll discuss today. We are going to discuss why managing water is important, the methods available to manage water, the interaction between water and soils, water management chemistries, their types, application methods, and best practices, benefits of using them, and then we'll leave some time for questions and discussions after the presentation. So first, let's talk about why managing water is important. What we know is that we have water wars in the United States. There's competition and demand for every gallon of water, and that's going to continue to be fierce as we move forward. The water supply is decreasing, and you can be proactive about managing water. When we think about the sectors of the economy that utilize water, it's utilized in landscaping, irrigation, industry, power generation, and recreation, among others. So let's talk about water use in the United States. We have 52 million acres of irrigated cropland in the U.S., and that's just in agriculture. That does not count sports turf management, landscaping, or other venues. In agriculture, we apply 79 billion gallons of water every day for irrigation of crops. And if we took all of that water and put it across the state of Texas over the course of a year, we would cover the state of Texas in 6 inches of water. So the bottom line is that growers, sports turf managers, landscape contractors need to improve crop yields and aesthetics of playing surfaces while using less water and the energy to move it. There are methods for managing available water. So annual audits can save between 10 and 15% on irrigation costs a year. And the Irrigation Association does a nice job of keeping its members up to speed on how to appropriately conduct irrigation audits. But there are other things we can do as well. For example, following good agronomic practices. No matter what plant you are producing, following good agronomic practices such as fertility and cultural practices will allow that plant to be as good as it can be at warding off stress. And finally, at Precision Laboratories, we believe that using innovative irrigation chemistries can also help you manage your available water in the plant root zone. So when we think of irrigation chemistries, we put them into 2 categories: infiltration surfactants and hydration surfactants. And we'll spend a little time on each of these before we move on. So infiltration surfactants break the surface tension of water. So think of a bead of water on the hood of a car and how that bead of water doesn't spread. If you were to add just a fraction of a drop of surfactant to that bead of water, it would spread readily over the hood of the car. And it does the same thing on the soil surface or throughout the soil pore space. So infiltration surfactants reduce surface tension. What this does is it reduces evaporation and runoff because you're moving more of your available water into and throughout the plant root zone. And again, it does move water uniformly throughout the root zone. When we think of hydration surfactants, these are engineered to hold water in the root zone and make it available to the plant. And the result of that is that it reduces plant stress over time, creating a healthier plant and improving yields, improving playing surfaces, and improving the aesthetics of landscapes. So who can benefit from the use of water management chemistries? Sports turf managers who are trying to produce safe playing conditions for their customers, landscape contractors who want aesthetically pleasing surroundings for their customers, specialty crop growers who are producing crops on sandy soils, which can often be a challenge, large crop producers who are trying to maximize their yields by using less water, and finally, golf course superintendents trying to produce firm, fast playing conditions for their customers. All of these can benefit from better managing water in the plant root zone using water management chemistries. So let's turn our gaze and talk a little bit about the water-soil interaction. So if we think about plant available water, when we have waterlogged soils or saturated soils, all of the pore space in the plant root zone is filled with water. That means that roots are short of air, oxygen, and gaseous exchange. So basically, this is considered drainage water and is really not available to the plant. If we look at moving to the next section, field capacity. At field capacity, this is where we want to be. So the macropores provide airspace and oxygen. Micropores filled with water are held by capillary forces, and plant roots easily take up the water. So this is, again, is the sweet spot in terms of water management. We want a good balance between air and water in the plant root zone. As the plant starts to utilize water and water is lost to evapotranspiration, the finest pores retain water held by strong capillary forces, and plant roots take up water with increasing difficulty. When we get to this point, this is called the stress point. What you may find if you hit the stress point is that you'll see wilt during the day and recovery at night. And then finally, the permanent wilting point is when the water remains so tightly bound by the soil that it's unavailable to the plant. And normally when we hit this point, plants wilt and do not recover. So again, what we want to do is try to maintain soil moisture at or near field capacity at all times. So let's review factors affecting water-soil interaction. There can be physical barriers that literally prevent the water from infiltrating into and throughout the plant root zone. These barriers could be hydrophobic mulch in landscape settings. They could be a thatch layer on top of fine turf grass, or they could be a crust on top of a soil. If we look at the soil texture and its effect on the water-soil interaction, I think we all know that coarse textured soils have difficulty retaining water, and that finer soils do a better job of retaining water. So if you look at the soil triangle, you'll see that the blue, or more plant available water, is through the silt and loams, and as you get into the clays and the sands, plant available moisture is lower. And finally, organic matter plays a part in the interaction between water and soil. So going back to the concept of water management chemistries, at Precision we produce surfactants that are used to treat the water, and these are called infiltration surfactants. And infiltration surfactants have two parts to the molecule. They have a water-loving head, the hydrophilic head, and a lipophilic anchor. And we know how to balance the hydrophilic and lipophilic portion of the molecule to make an infiltration surfactant reduce surface tension and allow water to spread better. So when we think about infiltration surfactants, they move water very efficiently, they help reduce runoff, and they also aid nutrients and soil-applied pesticides to become more uniform and effective in the plant root zone, whether it's turf, landscaping, or agriculture. So where would you use an infiltration surfactant? We recommend using them if you have a crust or a hard pan. If you're trying to grow crops or create playing surfaces or landscape settings on tight soils, or if you're dealing with wet conditions similar to those that we're seeing across much of the United States today. We also talked a little bit earlier about hydration surfactants, and these are designed to treat the soil. Hydration surfactants, again, have a hydrophilic or water-loving head, and they have a lipophilic or oil or soil-loving anchor. And we create the hydrophilic-lipophilic balance of these molecules so that we have more anchor, and we have the ability to anchor this molecule in the plant root zone where it sits waiting for available moisture, either delivered through rainfall or irrigation. Hydration surfactants are really good at reducing plant stress, and they do this by holding plant available moisture over time. When we do this, we keep the plant from going into periods of stress, and this often optimizes yield, and we'll look at some data on this later on. It allows you to actually utilize less water and the energy to move the water and still experience optimized plant yields and plant health. So if we think about situations where hydration surfactants are most warranted, it's when you have a limited water supply. When you're trying to grow plants, playing surfaces, or landscape settings on coarse soils, or if you're located in a dry climate where you need to irrigate on a regular basis and where water may be limited. So we've talked a little bit about irrigation surfactants, and we've talked about hydration surfactants. Well, what happens if you combine the two? What we found through research is that combining infiltration surfactants and irrigation surfactants produces a synergy. And what we see is that we actually get better results from combination products across a broader range of conditions. So let's talk about application methods. How can water management chemistries be applied to your playing surfaces, your fields, or your landscape settings. They can be spray applied through using typical spray equipment. The positives of spray applications are that they're targeted, so you get them right to the plant root zone. They're very good when tank mixing is warranted. So when you're trying to apply the water management chemistry with some other type of plant protectant or plant nutrient. Now the watch out is that spray applications require rainfall or irrigation to move the chemistry off of the soil surface and into the root zone. So again, they require irrigation or rainfall to move the chemistry or activate the chemistry in the root zone. So typically in dry land applications in agriculture, we do not recommend the use of soil surfactants because the performance may vary due to the conditions. Second way to apply water management chemistries is through granular applications. Again, the positives, these can be very targeted. They fit most markets. I know that most landscapers, sports turf managers, golf course superintendents, growers will make granular applications to their crops or their playing surfaces. And the nice thing about granulars is the granule can be applied and then it sits there waiting for rainfall or irrigation to move it into the plant root zone. Now, one of the watch outs with granulars is that they can be higher cost due to the addition of the carrier. But if you purchase or utilize a product where the soil surfactant is actually placed onto a plant nutrient, you can typically do two things with one application. Finally, the last method of applying these types of products is injection through the irrigation system. At Precision Laboratories, we really like this method because it's very convenient. And what I like about it is that the irrigation water itself readily moves the water management chemistries into and throughout the root zone. There is the requirement for injection equipment, but there are two types of equipment available to people in the industry. One is the typical electronically driven, and there are many companies out there to produce these. The other are Venturi driven, which have been used for a number of years. And so there are two ways to inject water management chemistries into the irrigation system and get them across your property. Let's talk a little bit about best management practices. So when we think about using water management chemistries, some of the considerations are that you need to really think about what you need to do with these. So what is the soil type that you're growing your crops, your playing surfaces, or your landscape settings on? What are existing barriers that you might have to overcome? Again, thatch, crust, or organic barriers. What climate do you have where you're trying to maintain your plant material or plant life? And what are the application methods? So if we go back and think a little bit about the different products, if you're trying to grow your crop or your playing surfaces on sandy soils, making sure that you have a hydration surfactant, one that will maintain volumetric water content, is a good thing. If you do have a barrier to overcome, you'll need an infiltration surfactant to help penetrate that barrier. And so you may be in a situation where a combination product works best for you. Again, in climates, if you're in a dry climate and you're trying to maintain volumetric water content or plant available water, you want to select a hydration surfactant. Whereas if you're in a wet climate, you may want to move water off the surface into the soil profile. In that case, an infiltration surfactant will work best for you. No matter which type of product you pick, we always recommend that you follow the label rates and application intervals. And these may vary according to conditions. So make sure that you read the manufacturer's label. And again, either apply through irrigation system, through dry application, or through spray applications. And again, if you do the latter two, make sure that you irrigate immediately after the application when either applying a granule or when spraying. Finally, many turfgrass managers, landscape contractors, or growers want to mix products together as a matter of convenience. If you're going to mix surfactants with other products such as plant nutrients or plant protectants, do a compatibility test. What you can see on some occasion is what we call phase separation. Phase separation is not a chemical incompatibility. It's the phase separation of what you have in the tank by weight. And so you'll see some layering that occurs in the tank. And simply using a tank or something that has agitation will alleviate any issues with phase separation. So what are some of the benefits derived from using water management chemistries? We're going to show some data on improved plant health or crop yield. We're going to show some trials that we've done on decreased water use or savings on power required to pump it. You can experience a return on your investment, i.e. higher yields and better profits and revenues. We've actually seen decreased soil compaction with the use of water management chemistries and increased performance of soil active products or nutrients. So let's look at some data. Everything we're going to show here is third-party data where we contracted a third party to put out trials and then collect the results of the trials. So this first slide shows a trial that was conducted in Florida with a strawberry grower. The strawberries were grown on sandy soils, and drip irrigation was the method of irrigation. In this trial, there was a control, and there were two water management chemistries. In this case, PX14005, which is the darker bar, and 14001, which is the lighter bar. The difference between these two is 14005 is the plant-based product, 14001 is the synthetic product. So if we look at the pickings of the strawberries throughout the course of the season, let's focus first on the pickings in December. So what we have here is the grower's irrigation standard is always listed at 100. And then we judge everything from that. And in the case of this trial, the grower was not interested in trying to save water. They just wanted to ascertain what effect water management chemistries would have on their yields. So if you look in December at the grower's standard, which was 100, we produced a 35% increase over the grower's standard with our synthetic product and about a 33% increase with our plant-based product. Moving into January, we saw some different results. Here's the grower's standard again at 100. 7% increase over that standard with the synthetic. And in this case, the plant-based actually showed about a 21% increase. If we looked across the entire life of the crop, there was about a 16% increase with the synthetic product and about a 24% increase with the plant-based product. One of the comments that the grower made to us is that the most profitable picking of strawberries is that early December picking in Florida. And so when you look at these yields of 33 to 35%, that meant additional revenue in the grower's pocket. These next set of trials were conducted in Georgia, again on sandy soils. Both of these were through drip irrigation. And the first one is drip irrigated fresh tomatoes. Now this trial was conducted a little bit differently. What you'll see here is the control, which is always in the green bar, is the typical irrigation regime chosen by the grower. In this case, in 2014, the grower was irrigating between 1.5 and 3 hours daily. When we asked the grower to reduce their irrigation times by 40%, you can see the resulting drop in total fruit weight. And by the way, the total fruit weight in tomatoes is expressed in per hundredweight per acre. So you could see a drop from 258 hundredweight to 139 hundredweight. When we included the two irrigation surfactants, again, the synthetic and the more natural, into the lower water regime. So in other words, we cut the water by 40% and utilized the irrigation surfactants. Look at what we found. We increased the yield to 285 from the grower standard of 258 and to 296 from the grower standard of 258. So again, additional revenue in the grower's pocket and utilizing less water and the energy to run the pumps. If you come down here and look on the lower right, this is squash, again drip irrigated on sandy soils. Here's the grower's standard watering regime, and again squash is also rated at 100 weight per acre. You look at when we cut the water by 40% and what that did to the yield. And then look at what happens when we took our synthetic product, moved it in to the lower water regime. We increased the yield from 66 hundredweight per acre to about 98 hundredweight per acre. So to do some economics on this, if you look at a hundredweight value of $35 per hundredweight, this increase in yield resulted in the grower getting about $1,113 additional per acre through the use of a water management chemistry and utilizing less water and energy to push it. So now let's move to a different crop. This is cotton, and it's grown on a different soil. This cotton was grown in the panhandle of West Texas. It was actually, this data comes from a trial that was conducted by Texas A&M and Texas Tech universities. And in Texas, they hold an annual cotton demonstration. And that's part of where this data was generated. So if you look in 2015 and we look at lint, cotton lint per acre in pounds, the typical irrigation regime with no water management chemistry produced 1,499 pounds per acre. When we added an application of a water management chemistry, it took the lint yield up to 1,731. That's a 15.5% increase over the control. When we looked at the total value of the crop, both lint and seed, this is the return on investment to the growers. So you look at lint at the control with no surfactant, producing about $779, and you look at seed producing about $223. And then you look at the addition of another soil surfactant, this one more engineered for tight soils. You can see that both the lint and the seed increased, and there was an increase of about $199 in terms of value per acre. So So again, we're getting consistent results across a number of crops. We've showed you tomatoes, we've showed you squash, and we've shown what happens on cotton. One thing that was interesting, when we were running the squash trials, the researcher came back to us and said, you know, there's something going on underfoot. As I walk the fields, I can feel a difference between where the water management chemistry was applied and where the grower standard was applied. So he asked if he could go out and take some soil compaction readings. And here's what he found. At the grower standard irrigation regime, the soil compaction was 103 pounds per square inch. At the reduced water volumes, you can imagine that the soil compaction would increase, and it did. It went up to 193.4. When we added in a soil surfactant to the reduced water volume, in this case, again, our synthetic chemistry, look at what happened. The compaction actually was reduced down to 68.3. When we shared some of this data with some growers on the West Coast where they do multiple crops over the course of a year, one of the growers said to us, well, this is great because if I can better work my fields before I put in the second crop, that saves me time and money. The other benefit that we mentioned is how water management chemistries can improve the performance of pesticides. So in this case, we take one of the newer generation nematicides, in this case Nimitz, and we applied the Nimitz first through the irrigation system and then followed up about a week later with a water management chemistry. In this case, it was our synthetic chemistry, PX14001. If you look at the control, there were about an average of 8.64 gall rating for the plants that were not treated. Nimitz did a great job. It cut that rating almost in half, down to 4.92. Look what happened when we combined in the program the Nimitz and the water management chemistry. We actually were able to take the rating down to 3.9. So how did that affect the yield of the crops? Let's take a look. Again, we're looking at fruit weight. So where galls were having an effect on the crop health, we saw fruit weight of 9.5 hundredweight per acre. With the Nimitz, we took that up to 69.2. And with the combination of Nimitz and the water management chemistry, up to 92.1. And again, I think this is occurring due to two factors. Number one, we're reducing the galls, so we have a healthier plant. And number two, we're keeping that plant from going through those continual periods of stress, and you're getting a better yield at the end of it. So I know we've shown a lot of data on agriculture and crops. Let's turn a little bit to turf and see what these products do in turf. Water management chemistries have been used for years on golf courses. They're a standard practice for most golf course superintendents, and they really are becoming more prevalent in sports turf and in lawn care and landscape. So here is a turf under stress. This happens to be some fine turf adjacent to a green on a golf course. This is in Indiana. And you can see that what we did is we marked off our trial with 4 points. So you have the four corners of the trial. And this was taken on fine turf prior to the treatment. Here's what it looked like 7 days after the treatment with a soil surfactant application at 5 ounces per thousand sprayed on and then irrigated afterwards. And you can see the difference. Here's our plot recovering very nicely, and here's the plot beforehand. So if you look at some work that was done at University of Georgia, what Dr. Karnak was looking for here was irrigation efficiency. And what he knew is that he had to maintain turf at a 15% volumetric water content to prevent the turf from going under stress. So what he wanted to do is to see when it went below 15%, how much water was needed to get it back above 15% volumetric water content. So this is the water alone. And you can see that it took them about, on average, 1.5 inches of irrigation to get back to 15% volumetric water content. When the turf was applied or was sprayed with a water management chemistry, you can see that it only took about 1/2 inch to get to 15% volumetric water content. So in other words, it took 1/3 of the water to get back up to that critical point where the turf would start to show wilt. So imagine what that means to irrigation efficiency on a golf course. We also did some work at Purdue University. We looked at localized dry spot on fine turf. So here's the check. Without any water management chemistries, we were showing 11.9, almost 12% localized dry spot. The use of a water management chemistry took it down to 2.99. Again, at Purdue University, looking now at the greenness of the canopy, we could see that we have a much greener canopy utilizing the water management chemistry than not. So again, what we covered today is we talked why managing water is important, how much water is used, and all the competition for that water. We talked about methods available, irrigation audits, better cultural practices, the use of water management chemistries. We kind of dove into the interaction between water and soils and trying to keep the water at that even balance between water and air in the soil. And then we talked about water management chemistries, the types, the application methods, and the benefits that growers, landscape contractors, golf course superintendents can derive from these chemistries. So with that, I've concluded my presentation, and I'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Don. So it looks like we do have one question, which I'll ask in just a moment. As a reminder, if you do have any questions, please type them into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, so the first question we have is, did you figure cost of soil surfactant in production cost to get net increase in profit?
Yeah, I can give an associated cost. So if we go back to the squash, where we were looking at about $1,100 per acre of additional revenue, over the life of that crop, it took 3 applications of a product, 1 at a quart and 2 pints. So in other words, it was a 1/2 gallon. That was about $30 for the cost of the surfactant, and it resulted in that $1,100 of increased revenue.
Great, thank you. Next question, how often do surfactants need to be reapplied if injected to be effective?
Yeah, that's a great question. All of our data is typically conducted, our tests are conducted on a period of between 3 and 4 weeks when injected. But again, I think the injection interval can be adjusted due to climatic conditions. If you get into a situation where you're very dry, you're losing a lot of water through evapotranspiration, that interval can be shortened up a little bit. Or if you're in wet conditions and don't feel the need for the surfactant, it can be lengthened a little bit. But typically, every 3 to 4 weeks is a good interval to reapply soil surfactants through the irrigation system.
Every 3 weeks?
Okay.
Did I catch that?
Yes, every 3 to 4 weeks.
3 to 4 weeks.
What are the long-term effects of using surfactants?
Another great question. So the surfactants that we're showing, the synthetics and the plant-derived, are still all carbon-based. And what we see is that they're broken down fairly quickly over time by the beneficial organisms that are in most soils. So there's really no long-term residual from them. Typically, that's why the performance lasts about 3 to 4 weeks and they need to be reapplied.
Okay, next question. Were there any instances where soil surfactant chemistry showed no benefit?
Yeah, that's a great question. Didn't show the data, but in one of the trials that we showed out of Georgia, we actually had another surfactant in the trial. So if you recall, we had a synthetic surfactant, we had a plant-based surfactant, and we had another synthetic surfactant. And what we found is that that surfactant was actually built with more water-moving properties or more infiltration surfactant. And we actually saw a little bit of the plant response or the plant yield go down. And what was happening there is we were using a surfactant that was too aggressive, and it was more than likely driving some of the water past the plant root zone. But that's the only case where we have really seen where we did not get a benefit. And again, it was just selecting the appropriate surfactants for the conditions.
All right, thank you. So those are all the questions that we have so far. We can wait a few more seconds since we have a little extra time to see if anyone else has another question.
Yeah, Clover, what I'll do is I have my email up on the screen. So if people don't have the chance to ask questions on this webinar, they can always contact me at dspier@precisionlab.com, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that they may have.
Perfect. It looks like a couple more questions did come in.
Okay.
What is the cost per acre for the product?
Yeah, again, that depends on how many applications you make over the course of the crop. Going back to that squash or tomato data where we were making 3 applications over the course of the crop, if you look at a $60 per gallon cost for the product and using a half gallon, there were $30 of water management chemistry applied over the life of the crops. And in the case of the squash, for example, the increased revenue was $1,100 per acre.
Okay, how does soil structure affect the performance of the surfactant?
Great question. We try to pair the water management chemistries, the surfactants, with the particular soil. So if you're trying to grow a crop or maintain playing surfaces on a sandy soil, you're going to want to select a product that has more hydration surfactant in it. On the other hand, if you're trying to grow crops on a tight soil, like that clay that we saw in the panhandle of West Texas, then you want to select an infiltration surfactant. So that structure kind of dictates the type of product that you want to select. And again, combination products can help bridge that. If we combine a product that has hydration and infiltration, oftentimes you can use that product across a broader range of soil types.
Okay, great. We're out of questions again. So if anyone does have any more questions after we end that one, one more just came in, so I'm going to ask that. How did you test for long-term effects to make sure there was no long-term residue/impact?
Okay, again, because these are carbon-based materials and the performance diminishes over time, we don't feel that we have an issue. We are looking right now at conducting a lab study to determine the actual half-life of the products. But normally these types of products, which are ethylene oxide, propylene oxide polymers, break down very readily due to soil microbes.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending, and a big thanks to Don for sharing his knowledge with us. If you have a question for the IA team, you can email us at education@irrigation.org, or if you have a technical question, like Don said, feel free to email him directly. And have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Clover.
Thanks, Don.